I think the difference is it's not integrated in what you're accustomed to doing. You're not probably trained as a hospitality person, whereas we're living and breathing that stuff every day as our other short-term rental management companies.
Well, hey, thanks for joining in for this podcast on the Student Housing Insight platform. This is not a normal podcast, but I wanted some important information that I wanted to share with everybody. The interview that you're about to watch was actually a lunch and learn webinar that we just wrapped up with a company called Vector Travel, as well as SVP of Operations from Campus Advantage, Pam West, talking about short-term rentals. And short-term rentals may be a new term. We also call it STRs. But Airbnb, VRBO, those type of platforms, I've had experience, and I know a lot of other operators have had experience with taking your fully vacant units and putting those on Airbnb. If you've ever done that by yourself, you know what a nightmare that is. And Vector Travel, that was a sponsor for this webinar, had actually reached out to me a few weeks ago and said, "Hey, Wes, we've worked together in the past on student housing stuff. They were seeing a lot of inquiries coming in regarding student housing assets that they're potentially thinking about using short-term rentals to fill up some of their vacancy." And I hate using the word "fill up" because you're not going to see that on the occupancy at the end of the year necessarily. But anyway, Mickey, that is the CEO for Vector Travel, we had a conversation. I said, "Mickey, I think we need to do a lunch and learn webinar because there's just a lot to consider when placing student units on Airbnb." I've had a very successful experience with it. I've had a very bad experience with it. And I think it's important that you don't look to yourself to do it. Use Vector Travel, somebody else, and certainly feel free to email me on any thoughts that you may have on the subject or looking for certain referrals. Vector is certainly who I would promote. So anyway, wanted to get this out and wanted to make sure that our audience, certainly, if you didn't attend today's webinar, that you take a look at what was said. And I think it's important information for everybody. So with that being said, let's cut to the webinar with Mickey and Pam on short-term rentals. Well, welcome everyone. This is a special Lunch and Learn webinar presented by Student Housing Insight. If you're not familiar with Student Housing Insight, we are a platform for student housing professionals to not only network, but come together and share ideas and data around the industry. And we've got a great idea today that we're going to be talking about. If you don't know who I am, I'm Wes Deese. I'm the CEO of Student Housing Insight, and I'll be your host for today's event. So with that being said, we're talking about short-term rentals today. And the reason we're bringing this up is back in 2019, 2020, I had a client that was dealing with some vacancy that we knew that we weren't going to be able to overcome. And, it wasn't something great. We're not talking about like 85% or 70%. We were talking about the difference between 90% and 93% on like a 300 bed property. And so we were really diligent in how we made sure that we assigned everybody and kept as many fully vacant units as we could. And we ended up partnering with Vector, who's their CEO is going to be one of our guests today, and got them to manage short-term rental units for us in those units, and had a fantastic response to it. And it's not perfect for every situation. And we're going to talk about kind of what is more of a perfect situation in student housing, because we want to make sure that operators are really thinking about that as they're looking this fall because we're nationally, I think right now we're about 2% behind year over year on average as far as pre-leasing velocity. Where that ultimately shakes out, we don't know. We know this is a slower lease up, but we know that we're going to be seeing a lot of international students who we're going to see enrollment with international students drop this year. We know that. So what does that mean for off-campus student housing providers? We'll find out. Time will show. But I reached out to, or I should say, Mickey at Vector reached out to me a few weeks ago and said he was getting a lot of phone calls from student housing operators, wanted to kind of know what was going on from a leasing perspective. And I said, hey, Mickey, we probably need to have a lunch and learn on this, and let's talk to the operators and make sure that they get a good understanding. But I do think it's a great alternative if you've got fully vacant units that you're looking at this fall, if you're in the right market and you have the right property type. So with that being said, let me bring on our guest for today. Mickey, Pam, how are you guys?
Hello.
Hey, doing great. Thank you for having me back.
Well, Mickey, I've done a little bit of an intro for you, but if you'll start us off, and then we'll roll over to Pam, and Pam, give us some background on yourself.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I'm Mickey Kropf. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Vector Travel. We have worked in student housing pretty much since inception in 2018, and really our charter has always been to monetize vacancy, activate those spaces, and ultimately be good stewards of those assets where we operate and be good partners to our clients. And we've done that in probably dozens of student housing assets with lots of different partners to date.
And I am Pam West, Senior Vice President of Operations for Campus Advantage. I have been in student housing for more years than I'd like to count, but I've been with Campus Advantage for 8 years, and I have been lucky enough to work with Mickey on a couple different assets over the course of the last 3 to 5 years. Excited to be here.
Oh, great! And I see a lot of the folks in the chat are already asking about a couple of markets. Bobby, I see your message there. I actually sent out, I think it was before you registered, but I did send out an email to everybody yesterday. One, asking about questions they've got for Mickey and Pam, and we'll get into some of those. But also highlighting some markets that I knew were behind, Charleston being one of them, and then also kind of coordinating with Mickey to say, hey, or which one of these are good for STR. And Charleston's got some hair on it. We'll talk about that, Mickey, but that is obviously a good market. I think when I checked last week, they were about 20% behind year over year on average. So interesting what's going on there. But really quick, I kind of want to start off with some basics. I think everybody knows what short-term rentals are. But short-term rentals, it's listing units on Airbnb and similar type of platforms to, regardless if it's a home, if it's a secondary home, if it's a multifamily operator that's got vacant units. It's a good opportunity to bring in some ancillary income that's on a nightly basis typically, or weekly basis. But I wanted to really kind of talk about this first question with you, Mickey. Bring it up here. Every jurisdiction has a slightly different definition of STRs. What's kind of the most common definition, and is it more based on length of stay, or is it just the agreement that's used? Can you kind of outline that for us a little bit?
Yeah, Wes. Typically, it is based on length of stay, and you're right that it does vary by market. But almost every single market out there in the U.S. defines it as a stay that is less than 30 days. And obviously, that typically goes without a lease. And so these are transient stays. They typically come with some other requirements like occupancy taxes, much like a hotel. But there usually are some other requirements that go with it. The only exceptions I can think of where it's not less than 30 days are markets like around the Disney resorts in Orlando, where they want to stretch out that definition so that it really doesn't compete with all of the hotels and resorts in that market. But yeah, that's a pretty safe place to start.
Gotcha. So I want to break that down just a little bit because you said less than 30 days. And I want to know, does that mean on Vector, and of course Vector uses Airbnb, but would Vector take something that if the folks said that they wanted, if a property manager said, hey, we're fine with 30-day terms, is that something that you could help with in that situation? Or
It is, yeah, and we do that really kind of since the pandemic. We expanded into what we call midterm stays, for lack of a better term. So they're not long-term leases, and they're longer than that 29 or 30 night stay minimum requirement. Sometimes that is through Airbnb or Booking or our own direct site, vectorstays.com, and sometimes it's through other platforms, which we'll utilize in those cases, like Furnish Finder. Many people have heard of, which is kind of like locum tenens, traveling healthcare workers, and a couple of other sites like that.
Gotcha. Well, hey, I want to go to this next question. This one's, for you as well. And this, I wrote this question, coming from, the standpoint of like a property manager that may be watching this. I think one of the most common questions they have for you is, what short-term rental regulations apply to my property and my location? I think, for example, in this, and Jan, I didn't prep you for this, but if you could actually bring up the Charleston link, and maybe we can share it to the screen, because I think that's a good, kind of observation of just how crazy it can kind of be, because even within a city, you could have 3 or 4 different overlays of STR, and exactly where a property fits on that. I was looking at one in Charleston that is literally a half a block inside kind of the more friendly STR overlay, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, if you could kind of give us you may have some specific examples you want to talk about, or just kind of the process that you guys go through for determining that.
For sure. Yeah. And it is the place to start. So it's really, when we get an opportunity to review, it's actually the first thing we do before we even look at the income potential. We start with regulations just to make sure there is a path. And if there is a path forward to do short-term rentals, what does it look like? Because it can vary a little bit by market. And fortunately or unfortunately, those regulations are typically very localized, like Wes is talking about with Charleston. In that case, if you pull it up, there's like a specific overlay district. They define different types of properties, and then there's different registration requirements, different operating opportunities and requirements as a result, based on how it's set up. But to back up a little bit, I would say still, as mainstream as Airbnb or short-term rentals have gotten, most markets still aren't going to have anything defined, codified, and our interpretation generally, when that is the case, is that short-term rentals are allowed. So if they're not specifically prohibited, then they are allowed, sort of logically based on our interpretation of the law. And then, otherwise, if they are defined, hopefully it's on a public website, just like a specific web address where they lay it out and it's very transparent. That's not always the case. That seems to be a bit of a luxury by market. And then otherwise, we're left to kind of go through the codes, interact with planning and zoning in the local area. But I guess the TLDR on it would be, just let us handle it. If you're inclined to do it at all, kick it over to us. We'll do the research and get back to you and talk to the local government as well.
Yeah. This is what we're talking about. You've got 4 different overlays, and between kind of 3 of them, it really, from my research, the biggest difference is how many parking spaces you had to have, per unit. And then that blue area that's there in the center, that's close to College of Charleston, close to downtown Charleston, that's actually the most favorable. But there is a permit required. So do you guys help people go through that process as well?
We do, yeah. So, again, it does vary by the municipality. Sometimes it has to be in the owner's name. So we may just be preparing documents, handing them back to the client. They sign and submit. But yeah, we help with all of this. We just sort of understand this is our world, right? Short-term rentals and the kind of nuanced regulations, operating procedures, all of that. that's kind of how we can exist and coexist within student housing. So we're happy to handle everything we can in that regard.
Gotcha. Wait, I want to go to a question that I got yesterday from someone who's registered to attend today and responded to my email. And I think this is what's on everybody's mind. So I know both of you guys have answers to this, but how do we prioritize safety for our student residents and prevent parties from happening in the STR units? That's from Cody Cotton at Maple Tree. So, and again, a reminder to everybody: if you have any questions, put them in the comments. Put a Q in front of it. We'll make sure we get it in front of our guests today. But anybody want to take that question off the top?
Well, I can jump in from the property side of things. Obviously, safety is always one of those top priorities that we look at. And at the assets that we have Vector at right now, we really haven't had a lot of issues. There's going to be sometimes, the issues could come from our residents and not the Airbnbs. But it's really just, making sure that your on-site team knows what's going on, who's staying at the property, and then obviously just making sure you're aware. Mickey does a great job. There's noise controls in the apartments to know what levels those are at. And so we really just work with our on-site teams to make sure that they're reporting anything. We're handling it like a normal noise complaint if there was anything. And so we're just making
Now,
sure.
Mickey, that sounds like you're observing people's conversations. Is that the case or what?
No, yeah. So they're not even to the extent of like an Alexa. It's just monitoring the noise. It's not reporting anything that's being said.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So that definitely helps. But again, I mean, we have 2 different markets right now, and very little problems with the stays or with the people that are staying with us.
Yeah, and thank you, Pam. And that's great to hear. Right, we always want that to be the case. And we find really, it's still property management. It can get messy at times, but the best recipe is just to prevent any problematic stays on the front end. Through the best practices, which they include everything from requiring guests that have a track record, on those platforms. So maybe they have to have a certain number of reviews or membership on a platform for a while, certain age requirements, and then we do light background checks. So they submit a photo ID, a selfie, the rest of their information. We're checking them, and it's very client driven on what those specifics are and what we're checking for, but can screen people out based on the results of those searches.
Gotcha. So I want to move to this next question. Do we have the right insurance and liability coverage for short-term rentals? I think that's, both, for the end user, if they've got proper insurance, and then just like, renter's insurance, and then also from a property perspective, what's typically required.
So we as an operator definitely have proper coverage. So we have commercial general liability coverage. We also have contents coverage. There's even a product that we in certain cases sell to guests, where they're taking out a small policy for the contents as well. And that's really more for like the small claims, which really are the super majority of any issues. Somebody might accidentally break a chair or damage a sofa or something during their stay, and then that policy could be tapped. It's great, actually. Nobody ever says that about insurance, but they pay out within a week. I think it's something like 95% of the claims that we've submitted have been paid out. So a really reliable solution there. And then on the client side and the ownership side, yeah, I mean, you do want to ensure that you are covered for this kind of commercial activity. So you can just check the policy or check with your insurance broker on that. We don't typically, verify that. So it's we just assume that we're dealing with a sophisticated party when it's a student housing owner or long-term manager that we're signing with.
And on the property side, we typically check with obviously the client and then the lender to make sure there's no additional requirements needed on the insurance side to bring these in. But typically we've seen that our property coverage will cover it.
Gotcha. Just got a question in from Jamie Mancini. And I think she's directing this towards you, Pam. Do tenants know this is happening at the property? Do you get any feedback of concern or have FAQs for tenants about it?
Yeah, in most cases, and hi, Jamie. Most cases we do because we actually utilize it as an amenity. So a lot of our websites will say we have guest suites, and really to try to advertise to the parents. It's a great place for mom and dad to stay. So why not push them toward Vector? Because it's a win-win situation for us. So typically, most residents do know that it's happening. Not all, because we know they don't all read their emails or are not paying attention all the time, but it's not something that we keep a secret. So we think that it's a great compliment to the property to be able to have these where mom and dad or grandma or someone could stay, even friends that are coming in for a football weekend. So we typically do advertise it to our residents saying, hey, tell your friends, tell your family we have these available.
Gotcha. Mickey, the first time I ever did an STR at a property is actually your first student housing client, which was the Adobe Center in Austin, Texas. There's a lot of history with Adobe Center. In fact, if you haven't heard my most recent podcast, or I think we put out one today, but the one before that was with Bill Bayless, and of course that's where ACC got started was with Adobe Center, and so we kind of go down a some history with that. But yeah, it was in my portfolio. The manager had like 2 levels of vacant apartments, and Austin's got a lot happening all the time. But South by Southwest brings in a ton of people, and it's also right during spring break, so a lot of the students are already gone. And the manager had this idea of, hey, can we put these on Airbnb? I went down just to do a visit during that week. And I wasn't even staying in Austin because I couldn't really find a place. I was in between Dallas and Waco. And in that one day of seeing what all that, he was very organized and had things going very well. And it brought in some help, from someone that did a lot of Airbnbs personally, to kind of help through it. I knew I never wanted to do that on a property again until I met you. But kind of this next question leads to this. I know this is one of the first questions I had for you when we started talking. What operational logistics are required for cleaning, maintenance, and guest communication? Because property managers of student housing have enough to do. This is not something that regional managers and owners want to put on the staff. So, kind of walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, so I think that was our realization when we got started at Adobe 2021, back in 2018, was just how much value we could add working alongside the onsite team, but just in our unit set and in our kind of specialized focus. So yeah, I mean, in theory, anybody could do this themselves, right? You could create some listings online, engage in the guest messaging, have cleaners ready, have some way to get the people in and out, all of that sort of stuff. I mean, we talk about it even internally at times that any one function that we're providing probably isn't all that complicated, with the exception of some of the technology and some of the integrations that we manage and build. But for the most part, it's just work, right? And I think the difference is it's not integrated in what you're accustomed to doing. You're not probably trained as a hospitality person, whereas we're living and breathing that stuff every day as our other short-term rental management companies. And so we can plug in and basically handle everything with that, except for the maintenance, which already has a solution in place, and we kind of just function like a resident there. If there's a need, submit a work order, signal whether it's urgent or not. But even just thinking about the time scale, right? Like a guest may be there for one night or 2 nights, and they have a question or a problem, they want it solved right away, right? They just don't have a whole lot of time. And so even just from a timing perspective, hospitality and long-term management sometimes just are a little bit of a misfit. And that's where we can come in and kind of bridge that gap. But yeah, we're doing all of the marketing, the revenue management, all of the guest communications, hiring, scheduling cleaners, auditing the cleans, interfacing with the guests, and then kind of the back end side too. So managing the compliance, managing the occupancy tax payments. Sometimes it's straightforward and handled by like Airbnb and booking maybe. Other times we have to do a lot of manual work and remittances. But the idea is to keep the onsite team for the most part out of it, to let the corporate clients pretty much just, see the deposit hit their account on a monthly basis.
Yeah, and it really hasn't been a heavy lift for us. Maintenance, obviously, we take care of those. We try to put in some level of just checks along the way, right? So that, we know how the unit is being maintained, but then also, working closely with Mickey. If we have a great cleaner and they come in, we'll, provide that information. We can share resources to make it a smoother transition for the onsite team.
Yeah, and Wes, if I may just add, because it kind of dovetails with the prior question too, but we love working with Pam, all of her staff in these assets, because they do have that approach of, hey, these are our units. They are hospitality suites, guest suites, and then we're kind of just, we just work there, right? We're activating the spaces, we're handling the guests, but we're really working in tandem with them. And I think just historically, that's led to the best financial outcomes too, when that's sort of the culture and the general management approach.
Yeah, just to expand on that a little bit, I know we're getting towards the bottom of the hour here, and I've got a couple other questions here, but I, I, I guess Pam, what's been kind of the big thing for you? I mean, now Campus Advantage has kind of established this, um, as working with Vector, and then also just having short term rentals and what to expect. I think from a marketing standpoint, I know what Mickey does, and I think everybody else understands what Mickey does in order to make sure that those things are marketed very well. You mentioned earlier about making sure parents were aware of it, on the website and that type of thing. But is there anything that two questions? One, what's for a manager, kind of what's the biggest thing for them to get over, or you thought that they were going to have to get over, or maybe they said, I can't get over this as far as short term, that ultimately they did. And then the other thing is just how do you guys, kind of market those yourself to make sure that everybody's aware that your property has it?
Yeah, great question. So, the first part for the managers, I think it's always a little nerve wracking, right? You're going to have people in and out. You don't necessarily know who's coming in and out. And I think that's why it's so important to go with a company that you trust. Because you need to have those light background checks. You need to make sure that they're being marketed in the right places. And so Mickey's team does that very well. So it's really a light, not a heavy lift on the property managers. Obviously, looking at the revenue side of it, they have to check to see how much revenue is coming in. They're kind of looking to see when there's optimization. Different seasons, football season, summertime. There's going to be different amounts of stays. And so for the property managers, it's really just owning it and knowing, hey, we have these. It's another part of what we're doing to offset some of the vacancy that we have. And then really just being a part of the team, owning it, right? Because if you want it to work and you want it to be successful, you have to, it's just like anything else, you have to work at it. And so the teams have to make sure the units look good. They have to make sure the property looks good. We don't want Mickey sending people to us. They're here for a big Oregon football game and the property looks terrible. So there is, that level of, wanting your property to show the best, because these people could be residents of yours in a year. Maybe they stayed there and they loved it and they're like, oh, I want to go live there. So there's so many opportunities for the property as well to be able to showcase how great it's run and maintained. But then also the managers just have to, kind of continue to nurture it just like they would going out and leasing to a vacant, to a prospect for a vacant unit.
Yeah. So that's the site level. Now I want to talk a little bit about kind of back office. I'm thinking of the conversation I had the first time when I told our CFO that we were doing this. And it was in a state, or actually, a state that actually required us to, we had a different tax level because it was hospitality, or tourism. And so it was at a different, tax rate than what rental income was. And so, Mickey, how do you guys help operators with the accounting part and tax reporting?
Basically, anything we're sending is a net payout. So it is going to be net of, platform fees, guest fees, occupancy taxes, typically at least. And so that it really is, this is a net number that you can attribute to those units. Or if you, well, really, we should let Pam maybe speak to it a little bit more about how they do it within their software. But I think for the most part, clients either mark the units as occupied, and then book either a positive or negative variance against what the lease amount would have been had they been leased. We have seen it maybe once or twice where somebody just kind of took the units offline, and this was just sort of net new NOI flowing to the bottom line. But I think that messes with a lot of other a lot of other items. With the unit count varies, and so I think for the most part it's the former. But Pam might want to address that too.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Mickey. So for us, we, have them shown as vector units, and then we just offset the revenue at the end of the month as kind of like a journal entry that came in to like miscellaneous income or something like that. So, it definitely will, have an effect on your economic occupancy, but when you look at the dollars coming in, we've seen months where we had, property make $12,000 in a month. And that's a great offset if you were going to sit vacant. So the accounting team does a great job of booking it at the end of the month.
Gotcha. Mickey, I know there's kind of two ways that you guys do this. The most simple way, and I think we had a little bit of a discussion about this in our prelim call. You guys have a guarantee, which is kind of like a master lease, I guess. I mean, it's just a guaranteed amount of income that would come, and it operates a little bit more like a master lease. And then you also got, you're just doing a regular rev share. And Pam, I know you mentioned that you've had some that you had to convince the owner, hey, we need to switch to rev share. We're really missing out here. Is there, Pam, is there a preference that you have one way or the other that you would suggest to other operators? And Mickey, there may be some other things you want to point out about the guaranteed versus the rev share.
Yeah, I mean, rev share obviously is always risk, right? Because you're going and you're saying, we hope we're going to make this amount of money, and there's no guarantee. So obviously, signing similar to a master lease, you have a lower income coming in, but it's a set number. And some clients feel good about that till they see the rev share number. And that did happen this year. We, started off and we said, hey, we're going to have a flat fee. Let's, we just weren't sure if it was going to work in this market, weren't sure how much we were going to make. And they wanted to see some revenue coming in. And I think 2 months in, rev share was doing way better than what we had agreed to, and we went back to the rev share side of it. So it's not hard, and Mickey and them have a great website that we can just go in and look at what's booked, what's come in, and you'll be able to see what those numbers look like.
The bread and butter, almost all of our agreements that we sign are revenue share. And frankly, it's part of the reason that we're still around, and that there are some other short-term rental operators that have gone under, that had overexposed themselves to master lease obligations. But we do have this product that Wes is alluding to specifically for student housing. And so in either scenario, we can tailor the term around the student housing cycle. So maybe we're coming in post-turn and then running it until term season the next year. So roughly a year, but it might be a little bit less. And then the standard arrangement would be 85% of the income paid out to the client, 15% management fee for us on those short-term rentals, and we're doing full service management. If it's the guarantee format, we have a specific agreement that goes with that. I will admit we underwrite. We're very conservative. In other words, the amount that we're going to guarantee is going to be pretty low. But we did at least want to have that option. I think in either scenario, there's enough work that has to go in for approvals most of the time, at least with owners, lenders, insurance, and so forth, that you're going to make more money with the revenue share, and you might as well engage on that front. But yeah, we wanted to at least have that option.
Gotcha. I'd love to ask some questions around, setup and just, that onboarding time. But in the interest of time, anybody that's interested, there's a QR code that refers you directly to a landing page that Vector is set up with SHI, and that will get you there. We'll get that up here in just a second. But um, uh, two questions I want to ask before we close out here, and I know we're already over on time. First one is, what's an ideal student market for STR?
Yeah, so we whiteboard them at times. We're looking at short-term rental data on a national basis. So we use a data provider called AirDNA, and we pull that data. And so really, any market that has good regulations for short-term rental, so they're short-term rental friendly one way or another, and then there's high nightly rate potential and relatively high occupancy potential. That makes for a good market. And so sometimes it's a surprise, like a Waco, Texas, that, it seems like a small market, but actually is, or Clemson, South Carolina, small market, but actually is a pretty solid short-term rental market. Other times it's a true tier one city. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned Charleston earlier. That has great RevPAR. It just has a pretty narrow restriction on short-term rentals. A place like Oxford, Mississippi, also generally undersupplied for short-term rentals, high demand, at least for part of the year. But it really, it's going to come down to case by case. If you happen to have an asset in a market like a gateway city, so like a New York, Seattle, San Francisco, LA. Unfortunately, most of the time, those markets also have housing affordability issues, and so thus they tend to have somewhat prohibitive or restrictive short-term rental regulations. But if you're inclined, if you're interested at all, reach out. We're happy to provide you that analysis for free, and we generally turn them around pretty quickly too. Maybe 1 to 2 days, get you the data and the feedback on the regulations.
Yeah, and I'll pop that QR code back up here again. Again, this form, the landing page that it takes you to, there's a form there that will allow you to put in a request for a revenue analysis. So make sure you do, even if you're not sure if it's going to work, or that it's something that you want to take on. Definitely get that analysis from Vector. So, Pam, you have anything to add to that ideal market question?
We are seeing great success in Eugene, Oregon. We're seeing really good success in Missoula, Montana. So, like Mickey said, it's really hit or miss. I mean, what we did at the end of the year, September, October, we said, okay, we fell short here and we fell short here. What can we do? And we called Mickey and we said, hey, we've got these markets. Some we couldn't make it work, but the ones that we did, we've seen great success. So I would not be afraid to reach out and at least just have the conversation, because it has really helped us with an offset to some of that vacancy loss.
Gotcha. So last question. We got to think about the end goal here, because as much as we like Vector, I don't want I don't want empty apartments. Although I have met some operators, specifically in Columbus, Ohio, that they underwrite STRs because they want that game day revenue, because it is so high. So I know there are some operators out there that are doing that. Some that have created their own company to do that. That's a whole nother discussion for another day. But anyway, what should be our exit strategy or flexibility plan for these short-term rental units?
Well, I think for us, the exit strategy, obviously, and that's what we love about Vector, is you fall short in August, September, you say, hey, our plan is to get full next year. So we want to utilize you while we work through that. Vector is flexible. They have a 60-day out. So you give a 60-day notice, which gives us plenty of time. We're now talking about those notices, but we've had great success. So we actually gave notice on some and we kept some, because our goal is still, and where our pre-leasing numbers are now, we feel comfortable saying, hey, we still want to utilize you, but we're going to do it in 2 units instead of 12 units or whatever that looks like. So you do have to have a plan, but the good news is you should know how your leasing is going by this time, and you can prepare for that. So we may not hit the mark, but we know we can call Mickey back and say, hey, you know what? We're going to add 6 more, and we'll work through that. So that's the good news, is you don't have to have a long-term notice period, so you can still watch your numbers up until kind of where where the bottom's starting to fall out.
The flexibility piece, that was one of the insights that we got earliest on within student housing, was just how important that was going to be to most clients. And it's maybe not ideal as the operator. You'd like to have stable inventory year over year that you can build upon. You can get repeat guests, stack those reviews, but that's just not always the case in this space. And so and maybe we stay in the same asset, but the unit mix changes in year two. But we work with any and all of those circumstances. And I think if you're talking about a true exit, so maybe it's, well, even refinancing debt, you have a lender looking at this, or it's selling the asset. Again, I think flexibility prevails there. If the lender's okay with it or the buyer's okay with it, then it can persist, and it can, even if there's like a burn off period, we communicate and work with whomever and however we need to. But yeah, I mean, in other cases, a building is sold and we've had to wind down operations pretty quickly as a result. But I think it's a nice tool when needed, and really, I think best applied if there is a portfolio, because you can plug it in one market in 1 year, and then maybe move it to another market and just have us or somebody else as a preferred vendor solution that does that for you.
Oh, great. Yeah, it's the times I've worked with you guys, it's always been really flexible. So, hey, listen, thanks so much for getting on and talking about this. Mickey, I know when you reached out to me a couple of weeks ago, you probably didn't necessarily have this in mind, but it's been funny over the past week or so how many people have reached out to me about it, and I think everybody's a little worried about where things are going to land for this fall, and I think short term rentals, if done right, and it's the right property, it can go very well. So thank you for that. I'm going to wrap us up now, but we'll talk to you soon. And Pam, thank you so much to you and Campus Advantage for giving us the operator's perspective as well.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys. Well, guys, that does it for today. If a couple of things I wanted to mention really quick. How do you like this lunch and learn structure? Is this something that you would like for us to do more of? We're going to do another one coming up in 2 weeks, 2 weeks from today on the 29th, with Opinion. And it is actually, they just released what they call Social Pro and Listings Pro. So an enhancement to their platform. If you're using Opinion for reputation management, and they're a fantastic group, a lot of student housing companies have joined them this year. This is one that you definitely want to be a part of. Evan, who is over there marketing over at Opinion, will be discussing those and kind of doing a demo. So look for information on that. You can go to our website and click on the events page. And I don't think we have it up just yet, but it will be before the end of the day. And also, we've got Shop Talk coming up next Thursday at 1 p.m. as well. So make sure that you join us for that, which is our monthly webinar on all things student housing operations. Guys, thanks so much, and we'll talk to you soon.